broad net, you will never catch that magical.
Expensive commodity rather than right now really expensive resources. So how do you get there? And so K-12 is one place where this exists in other sectors as well, where you have this low cyber maturity, large numbers of mid-sized businesses that all need some focus on cybersecurity. Manufacturing is another community that we just developed, manufacturing ISAC. And so we partnered with an organization called CFF, which is trying to train 1 million manufacturing workers about cybersecurity. So how do we do that? So it's just really difficult, challenging, and it's something that we have to figure out for the mid-sized business as well as the large enterprises.
Sure, no, absolutely. I think increase the funnel, and that also takes some patience and time and investment to go along with it. Especially if you're looking at hiring when you need, it's going to be very challenging. And I think the industry has not invested so far, so I think it will only get better with the work that you're doing. So great, thank you for that time. Charles, sir.
So hi, I'm Charles Mahler, and I guess right now I'm the president and only employee of CFF Leaders. But more importantly, I was a CISO for about 22 years or so before I retired. I wanted to sort of follow up on what you were saying, Richard, because the experience we had, one of the things we did was we built our own cities worth of talent. And so I will admit at Citibank, I had an advantage in that I had physical locations in like 100 countries around the world through which to hire. But what we did was, and this is a little bit sort of like the communities, but we did it on a more global scale. We actually picked certain countries, and we worked with the governments in those countries on education programs, tax incentives, and the like. And so, for example, Budapest was one such country. When we first set up our team there, across my security team, we had like 3 engineers in Budapest. About 8 years later, we had 800 people in my team in Budapest. And the 50% of it were kids out of school that we had worked with the government on creating programs and the like. And so it becomes a question of the degree to which enterprises are willing to sort of make mistakes and invest. And the things like what we did in Budapest, we knew that 3 years later, half the people we were training were going to be hired, and Morgan Stanley and MasterCard moved in 4 or 5 years after us, and then we moved, and so you're always sort of playing the thing. And so I think finding ways to sort of develop talent from the very beginning, and just think very globally about where that talent will come from is something we haven't really done either.
is a follow-up, and Richard, I'd like to tie yours two together. Is there's the bigger Fortune 500, and it's probably not all of them have the same kind of global reach, but many of the Fortune 500 and Global 1000 have that reach and are able to address that. But how do you think, and please feel free to comment on that follow-up, is that how do you think the suppliers and those that are vendors and those that are that don't have that reach can collectively tap into that ecosystem? So
Yeah, no, I think that you bring it up in different areas. And you also have to take a look at your workforce and say, I have, for lack of a better term, junior, mid-level, senior folks that are there. And you know what, it's based solely usually on experience of industry and everything else. And I think those are some of the areas. And I think, to Charles' point, there are some areas where you can develop very good ecosystems. We've done it in Brazil and everything else. We're partners with universities to provide research back into the organization, literally based on entry-level functions. But there are other countries where, to Joe's point earlier, it's even more accelerated. If I train someone 6 months from now, they're gone on that. Literally, it's the revolving door, and that's going to happen. But in those countries, usually they're churning out lots and lots of early adopters. They have a plethora of the middle management that's there because people are like, I don't want to work 24 hours a day. I don't want to work 9 to 9, 6 days a week. I want something that's more reasonable on that, on life work balance. And I think those are the keys that you can start getting into at the different levels that define people that's there. But I think it is different from organizations. You have to have a plan, but your plan is your organization, it's your culture, it's how you see it. And it shouldn't, it's for any talent, because cybersecurity talent is scarce. There are other talents that are very scarce in the same thing, from manufacturing, supply chain, similar areas.
Healthcare and medical, they have gone through the same issues.
So and then you can go back and look and what was there, how did they solve the problem, or did they ever solve the problem as part of that? And how was it done, and borrow from those areas. And I think it's around, people are now everywhere. You kind of place the side of it that it's kind of a level playing field anywhere that I'm at. It's there. Now it's just about what other attractives that I need to be able to bring in to the organization that's there.
Yeah. So I think fair point, Dan. If you want to weigh in
Yeah.
on that.
So first, God, thank you for putting this one together. And I apologize in advance if I take more airtime than my allotted, because I'm very passionate about this, because this is what we do. We actually go to solve the cybersecurity human challenge and the talent challenge. Dan Vigran, a co-founder and co-CEO of ThriveDX, we founded in Israel 15 years ago. And the main thing we do is we train people for entry-level positions. We train people career changers. We bring people who are not in the industry, who have no prior skills. We train them and then we place them in these in-demand jobs. And about 5 years ago, we ventured globally. And we started collaborating with top-tier universities in the US, University of Michigan, NYU, University of Chicago, community colleges, and so forth, bringing these rigorous programs. We in Israel come out of 8200, most of you know, right? And in the way that we train there is very rigorous, very quick, but we also do assessments beforehand to see that we get quality people, quality in terms of aptitude to learn. Most of our students actually are from under-resourced environments. In the US, over 50% of our students and learners are coming from under-resourced communities earning less than $30,000 a year when they come into our programs. We train them, 10 months program, they start with an intro course, so they also can see if it's for them, if it's good for them, if they like it, if they have a passion for it. But we also get to evaluate them, their ability to learn, the aptitude, in order to see if they can go through a 10-month program, and we'll be very proud to place them in jobs, right? And we find a lot of holes, and we need the help of everybody in this room, because I think the only way that we'll all be able to handle the biggest threat, which, the biggest threat in cybersecurity, we think is the cybersecurity talent shortage. And the only way is through collaboration. through enabling and having platforms that enable people from under-resourced communities to come and get this high-quality education. But then also for the enterprise, not just the government to fund them, but for enterprise to fund them, and for the enterprise to change their mind a little bit and to hire more entry-level people. Because everywhere you go, you need 5 years experience, 5-year experience. How are we going to make a change if everybody's only going to hire people with 5-year experience? How are we going to make a change if we don't bring new people into this industry? Of course, we talk about how lucrative it is to the students and so forth. That's part of the intro course that we quote-unquote sell them on this subject of cybersecurity, because we bring people, accountants, lawyers, Uber drivers, nurses, anybody and everybody that can learn. Because the only prerequisite is really to have motivation and a high aptitude to learning. You all know cyber sometimes easier than coding, right? And so it's how do we get the message out there? How do we all collaborate? How do we enable platforms to enable financing for these students? Because the only way that we'll make a change, we'll talk about DEI and resource community, but we have to give them the ability to pay for that and then to bring them in. And we have to have the ability for enterprise to hire entry level. And I think if they would change their mind a little bit, hire more entry level, have that superior, now he has 5 entry levels that can do the work. He has more time for career development. So you give him career development, which means you retain him more. He doesn't actually leave the next day. So it needs to be, I think, a bit of a change in the viewpoint of how to fix this problem. Because I don't think it's going to be fixed from one here, one there, one here, one there. We also do this program like we did in Europe for a few companies that we train people in Israel after we assess them and bring them, and they start building a little talent hub, a little cyber talent hub, and they grow their cyber employees there. So I think that collaboration, I think that we have to change the mindset and enable to hire more entry level, and I think funding. I think that we're setting up a platform that enables enterprise and government to fund these students, whether just to fund them or to fund them on a no interest bearing, like income sharing agreement, right? So when they get a job and it's above the poverty line, they can give back. So they give back on a monthly level a little bit into this pot that enables a next student to get learned.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dan. I think that all those elements actually enable. It's not just the availability of the content, but also how you make sure the access to content is there, right? So great points. Vijay, I'll go to you next for your thoughts.
Thanks. Appreciate setting this up. Vijay Jaju, partner in KPMG, currently their technology consulting, including data science sector as well. One of the philosophy from all of us as leaders, my father always says that a remarkable leader is how many more leaders he or she makes. So that's what sort of at least I sort of embrace and follow. I think the 2 points that I would say that we're, from a KPMG perspective, we're the professional services organization and global and working with Fortune 50, Fortune 100 organizations. 2 things that has resonated as well is like significant amount of investment or collaboration with universities and colleges. So we've got some very specific programs to drive, train, cross-train the talent. The second thing, to Joe's point, in terms of from a talent, from a retention or upscale, rescale, into whatever technology we refer to, we sort of work on sort of rotating our professionals. So, for example, lots of problems are converged nowadays, whether it's fraud, customer transactions, call center, cyber account takeover, credential replacement. There are multi-dimensional problems. So what we sort of work is like, I need a security engineer, I also need a data engineer, I need a data scientist, I need a software engineer. So what we sort of aim is getting some of these talent to really put them in a cross-functional team and then rotate them. And sort of that allows them to sort of not get bored or learn different skill sets. And then allows them to just keep them excited, like, hey, this is a different problem. So totally second, but totally saying, it's we use our professionals, et cetera. Of course, it's an alum, they go to different organizations, that's fine, but I think we have to keep that funnel going. And what sort of we found is quote-unquote secret sauce is that how do you continue to cross-train, bring that reskilling. And then of course now I think Richard mentioned there's a lot more flexibility to the location.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, COVID, one thing if COVID is done, then we can work in different places. That really opened up more flexibility for us.
Absolutely. I'll come to you, Jim. Let's go to James. Jamie.
Yeah, thank you. Jamie Gerber, I'm CFO at IronNet. So, Joe, I've figured out a way to overcome my hang-ups about 4% for the right kind of people. So, I work with General Keith Alexander, and apologies from him for having to be a very poor substitute for him today. But COVID and whole it, and he couldn't travel. But anyway, I'll do my best. I actually mostly just wanted to pose a question back, Charles, to you. So I know you're up to talk about something, so I'll give the remainder of my time for you. But I like the ideas about finding these pockets of talent around the world. But as a service provider, we are often finding requirements that people are insisting on U.S.-based SOCs and U.S.-based talent. So how do you overcome that?
So I'm not sure I know how to overcome, other than through educating, right? I was lucky in that being in a global firm, I never had this sort of prejudice about US-based anything. Other than the fact that the Department of Defense is my Citibank's largest client, and there were certain places where obviously US citizens, but there's very little real need for that. And I think it's more about educating.
Yeah.
One of the things I talked about when I was selling being more global was the whole idea of diversity of thought. All right. And what I would basically say is my team in Budapest, when they think about Russian organized crime, will think differently than my team in Singapore would think about Russian organized crime. And my team in Singapore is going to think differently about North Korea. My team in the US is going to think differently. And you start to bring in this whole conversation about diversity into this, because diversity has many, many dimensions, not just the standard ones that we always think about. And so that was part of how I would try to sell it. The other thing was just a practical thing. You want the best people in the world. Very few of the best people in the world want to work third shift at any amount of money.
Yes.
So unless you're willing to make one of two compromises, take the work out of the US or settle for not having the best people, you got your choice.
So from a requirements perspective, you're kind of limited to the 5 eyes, or?
No, in our
No.
In our case, no, absolutely not. I mean, we limited it to we avoided countries that were sanctioned.
There you go. Go back close to the good start.
But yeah, it wasn't just like Five Eyes countries. The other thing I just wanted to say quickly, which is why I stuck my 10th card up, is we keep talking about cyber jobs. I'm going to challenge you. What the bleep is a cyber job? Right? I had 2,400 people that worked for me at Citi. There were a lot of different kinds of jobs that were all suited for a lot of different kinds of people. And I think we get so stuck when we talk about cyber jobs, we're talking about our SOCs or our pen testing team. We forget about a lot of other kinds of jobs that are a lot of other different skill sets that we all need. And so, with that, I'll shut up.
No, I think that's very. There are different ways of creatively adjusting to the requirement, and I think that's definitely one. So Eduardo, I'll go to you. In the next 7 minutes, we got Eduardo, Jim, sir, and then Raj. Wind up that thing.
Thank you, I'll be brief. Just to expose an idea here. The lack of talent problem is one that we eventually will address in the term. We have now 24 colleges offering cyber degrees, and all of that is great. That said, the problem we have is now. And so the question is, how do we solve it now? And a bit to Dan's point, a bit to Charles' point, is, cybersecurity is a very broad field. And we're looking for the best people in the world to solve all of those issues. And the reality is that, outside of the Fortune 1000, the rest of the economy can't afford those $400,000 a year jobs. You just can't. And so the question is, how do we produce talent, maybe not the best talent in the world at entire cybersecurity, but how can we segment cybersecurity in little verticals, whether it's endpoint or network or firewall or whatever segmentation you care to do, and train people not as a career from college, but think of it as a trade. We used to have all kinds of issues getting software developers, and now you have little schools that offer C courses or Python courses, and in 10 weeks you're good to go, and there you go. So I'm not saying this flippantly. I just want to make the point that we have to be able to cut the problem in smaller pieces that we can produce talent faster and more economically in the short term, while those 24, 25, and eventually hundreds of schools produce, BS, bachelor's in science or cybersecurity. That's it.
All right, there's some BS there too, right? No, Bachelor of Science is what we want, not the other one. Very good. Leah, your observations, please.
Yes, hi, Leah McLean, Vice President at MasterCard Cybersecurity Advisor Group. Used to work with the Cyber Future Foundation. I want to go back to what Dan mentioned on assessments. I think that's key in a lot of how we hire and when we are looking at HR, the way that folks are coming in to apply. Because I don't think the current system is doing justice to get the right talent in. And it misses a lot of talent, keyword search or resume, et cetera. But then I guess the question back to everyone is, how can we get HR to change more broadly and widely? And maybe it's back to what others have mentioned, more and more education, that we need a different way in HR, but how can the leaders within cyber companies help to influence that and change that? Because I think that assessment piece is key for a lot of people out there who don't, who will say that they're not understanding the same skill sets based on what's being presented, how they see the talent coming today. And then the last thing I want to say on the diversity front, because I know we've talked a lot about getting people from university, but also vocational training organizations, or those who have those programs in place where they're already training people in cybersecurity. You can feed from there. Military, there's a lot of diverse organizations out there. They're specific on cyber, and of course, I'll say for the females in the room, women in cybersecurity groups as well.
Very true. Yeah, I think diversity of thought, diversity of background, all of that adds up to that pool. There you go. Thank you, Leah. Jim, sir.
Sure. Jim Regas, Depository Alliance. Pleasure to be with some of the experts here. I'll be just very brief and narrow actually about this. And it's continuing professional education, CPEs. There's an enormous opportunity to do some curation of very short, critical learning objectives, topics that you can both qualitatively and quantitatively increase the cyber workforce very rapidly. And we're looking at that, how you curate that, and how you use technology to understand the most important skill sets that are going to be needed in the next 6 months, year, 18 months. And I think there's also a really good opportunity using that to build an incentive-based ecosystem for the real experts in the industry to be doing these very short sorts of online learning. And I think it's how you can do some meaningful, impactful things with scale, with things that are in a lot of cases already out there, but people just aren't aware of all of those resources that are available.
Sure. And coming from someone who's started when the cloud was the hype to the Cloud Security Alliance what it is today, I think that continuous knowledge sharing, learning goes a long way and also expands the talent pool. So thank you for that. Raj, you want to observation?
Yeah, so Raj Patil, Executive Chair, Purple Book Community. I have a saying that I'm reminded of. It's saying that it takes a village to raise a child, and I feel it takes a community to raise a cybersecurity professional. Just if I look at the expertise that's there in the room here, if there's a way to tap the expertise that's there in this room to build a workforce that is prepared from the diverse thoughts that you all bring in and diverse backgrounds that you bring in. And that's the vision with which the Purple Book Community was started. The idea was to bring people together and contribute their knowledge to this work. So it started off as a project to write a book, the purpose of software security. It's available, it's open source. Just like this open source software, how about if you open source the idea of building these cybersecurity workforce, right? So that's the idea behind the Purple Book community. I know time is short, I can't go into details here. I'd be happy to talk, and would be happy to have you at the Purple Book community center.
Absolutely. We this started off with, I think there are a few authors here already in this room. We just talk to them because they have they started this initiative with the mind of sharing knowledge, and it has come to such a great climatic point where this can go and actually grow into this whole securing application from the get-go, which we have been champions from the very beginning. It's just that there were so many obstacles, but we can't, no more excuses, right? We got access to all the years. We're in kind of nearing the time, 44. Okay, so any last thoughts, quick last thoughts, Charles?
So just to respond to Leah's comment, one of the things we actually did at City was we actually worked together with our HR group, and we actually developed a whole set of security-specific job families. And so from everything from our junior level to managing directors, we had very specific security-defined sets of job families. And even within security, we had 6 different kinds of jobs that we worked on. The harder part, though, and I think Richard, you made the comment about getting HR to figure out is this whole idea of compensation, because the truth is, you can create the best HR structure and everything else if they don't figure out the compensation thing. 4% year to date is falling behind. In banking, we mark to market all of our portfolios, but we fail to mark how we treat employees.
Yeah, and I think it's important. If your merit increase is 4% and your bonus payout is 200% of things, it balances out. Or you've got some stock options or issues, you can figure out the compensation, but you have to figure out the compensation. Or every time, every one of your employees is going to be you and the HR having a conversation of how to keep this employee because they're going somewhere. So it's either you do it, you think about it and do it ahead of time, or you're just going to spend hours upon hours of trying to save employees that are already lost.
Yeah, but the HR folks prefer it that way because they're paid to reduce your cost, not to keep your people. So maybe we have to change the metrics you apply to the HR people's success criteria.
Last one.
Just a real quick question to pick on Charles more.
He's not going to sit on that side of the room tomorrow.
So what was the environment? What was, we talked about working with NYU, we talked about working with other, whether it's nation or region, state, right? What made that the environment that you chose to develop that? Which then you said other banks kind of glommed on and probably had many years of success there.
Well, the truth is, like, in some sense, we didn't necessarily just choose Budapest. We sort of planted a bunch of seeds. We had Warsaw, we had Budapest, we had Dublin, Ireland, we had Kuala Lumpur. There were a bunch of places we planted seeds. Budapest is where the government and everything really got into it, and where the seeds sort of grew. But we picked a whole bunch of spots, and we had 2 or 3 that worked.
No, my question is, was it more of a center for excellence? Because we used to have similar models of manufacturing spaces. Where do you build manufacturing location? Well, there is some schematics of where, when, how, but it's also around people, because you can build it anywhere. If you don't have the people, you're not going to be successful at it.
Yeah,
So.
and in some sense, what we did was we created a center of excellence, but over years we grew the people. Because like I said, when we first stepped into the location, we had 3 people, and then 5 years later, we were, I think, close to 800. And so that was a lot of growing.
And it's the gravitation. You can see it north airport area of all the bio.
Yeah.
But bio, you're like, why in the world did all the biopharmaceutical companies decide
It
to
needs an
locate here?
ecosystem.
It's an ecosystem
Yeah.
internally to that. The same goes for manufacturing. If you put a plant in one place, guess what? All the secondary manufacturing, all the suppliers will gravitate to that. I don't think we do that in cybersecurity enough, especially
coming.
on the center of excellence.
I think it's coming, and of course, there are some hot spots, and there are some global collaborative spots that are out there. But I think it has now kind of gravitated towards a place where there is attention, there is discussion, and there is real action. It's about how we kind of get all of us together to make it happen. Well, thank you for a invigorating discussion on this workplace and workforce issue that is so close to all of our hearts, because you cannot be leaders without a team, and it's very challenging to do it that way. We would continue our discussion on the topic and go towards the incentivizing cyber threat actors in a little bit. But I definitely want to acknowledge and share with you an important program that typically we do this at the dialogue event, because I think we have some of the best minds here to catapult us forward on some of our activities. First, I would like to acknowledge the CFF team members, core operational team members who actually run this organization. As we're an organization of 7,000 people, but 0 staff. So you can imagine. I would start with Diana Kelly, who's on our executive advisory board and representing the board of advisors. Leah was with us and still with us in a different role, but she actually started the entire the workforce program with Department of Labor, and now evangelizing that with the MasterCard banner. Catherine has been with us for about 18 months now, and she's the international connector, as well as she knows probably more about Texas than I do, living there. And then Khalol's been my buddy for the last 10, 15 years, serves as our tech person, but he's talk to him about identity if you want to. Has done millions of dollars of project engagements on the identity side, so a great friend to pick on. But if you ask any questions about how to pull out an event, there's your man. One announcement I definitely want to share with you is something that's very close to our heart and has been happening, unfolding very, very fast in the last 6 months. It started with the Afghan refugee crisis and the evacuation. We, as a security leadership group, we very quickly got called in, and we supported not only the evacuation process, but also transition, and now got very deeply involved in the resettlement process. What it ensured was basically providing secure communication platforms and framework. Microsoft was very generous working with us to set up the framework for Afghan resettlement and evacuation. A lot of the leaders that we worked with were women judges and law enforcement officials in Afghanistan. In fact, we hired one very talented lady who joined us, Meena Siddiqui. She landed in the country on 18th October. By 20th of December, she was already working for us. So we know very closely how it means and what it means to be in that mode. Going through the experience, exposed us to a completely different dimension about refugee resettlement and the global humanitarian challenge that we can contribute to. As many of you know, I left my day job at EY to contribute to as much as possible on the CFF side, but also totally commercially go after the whole workforce development process. And I think with your support, we can do a lot. But what we realized is that it's not just the content that's there, right? I mean, there's so much amazing content that's out there, but it's the access to content that's become an issue, right? So if you don't have a right device, you can actually learn that content. You can't really, learn everything on this iPhone or a device. Typically, people have a mobile device. Access to laptops and good internet becomes a limiting issue for those underprivileged, underrepresented communities that can get to it very quickly. As the Russia-Ukraine situation unfolded, that got us even more deeper into that space. And what we realized is that we had to do something about it. As I left EY, the leadership there were kind enough. We recently got funded one of the projects that I think I'll need your help and seek your help and see how we can address this. But we are setting up a mobile tech help desk to start with. It's the overall program is about a 4-year program to set up to break the barriers of digital divide, digital access that people have. Starting with the US, of course, this is where we can pilot things very quickly. So we partnered with EY, my former employer and now great partner, as well as the others that are there, World Relief and several other IFC, several other refugee resettlement agencies, DHSS, Operation Allied Welcome, and their outreach office. So we've got a pilot coming up where we are going to fly into and establish a mobile help desk to provide access, initially the workshop, access to those that need help. It started off with the refugee resettlement support, but now it's open to those that are needing it, most. And it could be an underprivileged community that probably, in your communities that you work with, and starting with about 20 devices that are going to be available. But the plan is to scale it up to each state and region, to come up with partners and channels where we can have equipments at a place where people can get to them, learn. And the focus, of course, is making sure that there's access to cybersecurity and technology, careers, technology learning. And with my new day job as the as the entrepreneur on the CyberEyes side, and we'll talk about it a little bit probably at the end of this and during networking session, we are making sure the National Cyber Help Desk we are setting up, and that's our new job now. As we're setting this up, the first one is going to come up in UT San Antonio at the National Security Collaboration Center. That was just done this past week. And with CyMan, with UTSA and the National Security Collaboration Center, I think that couldn't be a better place to start. What we're looking to do from a commercial standpoint is to have those places, before we can actually have this network of access nodes. We'll have these places where we set up NCSD. The daytime, it's going to be learning in a more structured way, but outside the business hours, we'll make sure that it's available to people who are looking to get access to learning. I think we need to find really creative ways to give access to people, and one of those areas is digital devices. If we don't have devices and network, it's very difficult to learn cyber and technology in general. So the goal is to establish this, co-locate these in schools and community colleges and K-12 nodal schools, where the kids and students are already there. Right? We're not asking them to travel somewhere, and I think we have spoken to some of you about the different challenges that we learned firsthand going to the DOL program. Is that you have very talented people who are getting access to free scholarship at a community college, but they can't really avail that because they have to make some grade, and they can't make the grade. Not an excuse. It's real. They have a day job that they have to feed themselves. They can't have a ride to the school. Sometimes they are looking for the ride. It takes about 90 minutes for some. One student we ran into, and this is a story that probably everyone in this room should know. Find this kid called Caleb Worku that we got to know in Augusta, Georgia. Him and his mom, he was a cybersecurity bachelor student, undergrad student in Augusta, and his mom used to ride with his mom to school every day, 90 minutes. They used to work at night together to feed the family, but they used to be in the school. And then his mom joined him at the cybersecurity school. So what a compelling story. And then when he explained that to what great lengths they were to go, it was really humbling. So one of the reasons was that, that was the only place where he could go and actually get his hands on something to learn. And fortunately, and congratulations to Caleb, he's at Sandia National Labs for his senior year internship, and of course he'll go out flying colors and join a pretty good institution. But there are many Calebs that probably maybe you don't know, but please keep your eyes open. Where can we set this infrastructure up, that we could reuse this, the great resources that we have ourselves, we take it for granted. There are so many who don't, and that's probably one good way to expand the reach of our cyber talent focus. So, let's jump into this. This next one I think will be equally intense, but we'll try to wrap this up on time. The next 40 minutes, let's talk about cyber threat actors and how we can incentivize them. It's also a discussion about what are the practical means, what are the barriers that we run into. How can we work together? There is a law enforcement angle. Many of us are pretty closely embedded into that ecosystem of defense, intelligence, and law enforcement. But in our day job, we work with business on a day-to-day basis, and we know for a fact how hard it is not only to protect the businesses that we're entrusted with, but also do that in a scale, on a continuous basis, and collectively put our